Hello. I want to try making a React video today. There is Legendary Drops, whose video kind of comes up pretty often on my home YouTube page. And while he's kind of in the realm of like, there's feedback that's really passionate and aggressive. And I think a lot of game devs kind of have a hard time listening to the real context of what he's saying. Maybe I just grew up on a really weird time on the internet. I did want to just go through this video, hear him out, and kind of give my thoughts as we go. Just start from the beginning.
We
Go.
are in the calm before the storm, the eerie silence before the first shot is fired. Live service games almost entirely across the board have been losing players, losing relevance, and hemorrhaging money. While at the exact same time, every major publisher is rushing to go and make the next live service game, or they are desperately clinging on to their existing ones, trying to stay afloat.
Yeah, that is. I mean, like, I think Sony learned a huge lesson when Concord came out and it didn't do very well because you could see that they subsequently canceled live service games. And if they have any spinning in the barrel, I'm pretty sure they're going to keep doing that because time and time again, there are companies proving and selling single player games really well. But you're slowly starting to get people to realize these companies are finally getting it. You can't just spit out a service game and expect everything to just be peachy.
Realizing that's exactly what's causing this problem in the first place, because something's been going on, but nobody's caught wind of it. And it makes a lot of sense. In most cases, we look at gaming failures in a case-by-case basis rather than zooming out and looking at the bigger picture. But when you do, you see that the foundation is starting to crumble. You look around and you see that every player in every community is complaining about the exact same things. You see prices that are skyrocketing and quality that's plummeting. You see
Yeah, there's actually something really freaky going on where I don't know if it's just too much noise in general in the games. You see every player base start to kind of fall a bit. But maybe there's just too many games out for you to jump around. So now we're all playing the meta of all games rather than sticking to specific games. I feel like sticking to specific games is you get one or two options, right? You get the person that's going to commit to your game forever, and or you get the person that's going to hop from game to game playing whatever they can with their friends in different ways.
Transactions become the main priority of these companies, monetization become the main priority of these companies, and at the exact same time, communities are dying. You see that content creators and streamers who have built their entire career around single games have lost relevance at a rapid rate, and that's a sign of decay. That's a sign of collapse. These are warning signs that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. The industry has overvalued live service games to a reckless degree while undervaluing single player games or just, day one paid for experiences.
True.
And most of them have completely abandoned them. Look at EA. They come forward and believe that Dragon Age the Veilguard failed because a lack of live service elements.
Yeah, that was dumb. I mean, like, he might get to it.
Yeah, this is reality. What world do we live in? The best-selling and most talked-about games over the past few years have almost all been single-player games. And I think the majority of people will probably agree with me on that. Those are the games I remember the most at the very least. Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about the slow drain on relevance in live service games, the exhaustion of the player base, and why putting all your money and betting all your money on live service has now become a death sentence. The industry is changing, and I don't think they're ready for it. Now, every single year we go through the same cycle. Players and content creators debating whether or not their favorite live service game is finally dying. World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, Call of Duty, Apex Legends, virtually every major title goes through one of these phases. And for years, it's mostly been hyperbole. But now, it's slowly becoming all but inevitable.
Yeah, Asmongold killing games.
Fatigue, lack in content, financial strain, new game releases, or unchecked issues, players are leaving live service games in droves right now. I've mentioned this before, but
it's really hard to commit to a lot. The recipe for a live service game, I mean, I'm still just a normal consumer, right? If the game has no legs, I'm just not going to bother. And if the game has no legs, but my friends want to play it, I'll give it a shot. But if I don't see longevity or commitment or investment in it in the same way that the top service games are out right now, I just don't mess with it. I'll just say, whatever. I might as well play a single player game because at least I don't have to deal with people.
Duty has lost nearly all of the players that it gained from the launch of Black Ops 6.
That one's scary.
Normal, but this isn't a post-launch fall off. This is a
that one is scary because Call of Duty is always seen as like the king of it all.
Warzone as well, meaning that All numbers across the board are plummeting. YouTube and Twitch metrics are telling the same story. Content creators who have built their audiences around Call of Duty are seeing a fraction of their normal viewership. Apex Legends lost 70% of its player base in just 1 year, and all the complaints between these two games is almost identical. Lack in variety of content, reusing cosmetics rather than creating anything new, content that raises the skill ceiling and alienates casual players, persistent bugs and performance issues, rampant cheating, and yet somehow, some way, the only—
Oh my god, the rampant cheating. Why do I want to commit to a game if there's other people constantly cheating on it? That's kind of one of the reasons why I really enjoyed playing console exclusive playlists. Um, because as weird it is to have a controller, right? You could say pros and cons or whatever, especially if you're playing a shooter. I always appreciated that when I was playing on console, that would be the lowest chance of finding people that were hacking. So then it just became more fun to play with everybody when they're not cheating. And when someone does something impressive, you're actually impressed by what they're doing because you know guaranteed with like 98% certainty that they're probably not cheating.
thing these developers seem to prioritize is monetization. Players are bored,
Yeah.
fatigued, and frustrated, while these companies behind these games keep extending their hands asking for more money. And this has been a consistent trend because last year, Ubisoft reconfigured their battle pass for Rainbow Six Siege, increasing prices, removing rewards, not adding any new content to the game, while asking players if they'd like to purchase a membership to keep playing the game. Many live service studios have tunnel vision profit and have completely lost sight of the quality of their product and the service that they're supposed to be delivering. That's why they're losing players. I mean, look at what's going on with League of Legends. Riot has always been a studio, for the most part, that has been frequently celebrated by its players. But recently, the developers stepped forward to explain that while player retention is stable and revenue is up, they've come to realize that Hextech chests, a free reward path that many players made their primary way of earning free cosmetics, is somehow not sustainable anymore. And quote, "We are giving away too much free stuff. Guys, we're making enough money, but we want more." That's essentially what they're saying here. Who the hell greenlit this? These—
Yikes. Yeah. The funny thing about a lot of these monetization practices is that on a personal level, I checked out so early on all that shit. You showed me a Fortnite battle pass. I said, no thanks, like pretty quick. And now anytime that I see a Fortnite doing something that like I would want, I'd be like, I'll play this if I can do this on my own time. But I don't really want to rush to play in order to fill a bar to get a skin for a game that I'm ultimately not that interested in playing anyway. Fortnite is interesting in itself because it's easy to get in the head of like that game does have legs, that game does have longevity, and if they keep building on it in various ways, then you can apply the skins that you would get now into stuff in the future that might be completely different, right? So I'm looking at like the like epic Disney thing. I'm kind of a Disney adult. There's another video for that. Don't judge me, please. That would be exciting to have all these skins for. But if I have to play the FOMO game, I'm going to opt out. But it is weird that like I've checked out so much to this kind of stuff that because my brain sees it, right? It's not really about the core enjoyment of the game. It's about getting stuff that's digital that like I don't really need. I'm really just here to play games to get the fun experience out of it and have it be self-contained and be removed from as much real life bullshit as possible. So when you're kind of stuck in this little realm, I don't know, it gets annoying and it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I've kind of never bought into it.
These dudes said, "We only want you to buy something when you feel it's worth it, yet you took away the only way for players to get free stuff." How did you think this is going to go over? Now, while many live service games have been struggling the past few years, much of it for self-inflicted reasons more than anything else, single-player games have been thriving. We are in the middle of
They
a
have,
renaissance,
yeah.
with both indie and AAA games reaching massive audiences and delivering
Even
real
old games.
satisfaction. Hogwarts Legacy outsold Call of Duty. Baldur's Gate 3 is still one of Steam's most played games. Black Myth Wukong shattered Steam's concurrent player records. Kingdom Come Deliverance.
You can play those at your own pace.
Within 24 hours, and the player numbers continue to rise.
I'm really happy for those guys for
While
that.
live service games are still popular, we are witnessing a shift. Players are finding more value and are being more valued in single-player experiences. It's hard to ignore all the successes. And I think this is the key weakness in live service games and why they're struggling. Many single-player games still understand what players want, while live service games have lost sight of it entirely. The best single-player games aren't just selling gameplay, they are delivering a complete experience, a world worth investing in, a story worth following. Meanwhile, live service games have become nothing more than a financial experiment rather than a creative pursuit. Studios aren't building games for players anymore, they're building platforms to extract revenue. Every update, every feature, every design decision is dictated by retention metrics and engagement algorithms rather than genuine craftsmanship.
Oh my god, that is so true. Some of the convos I remember having are just like, but what's the fun in doing this? Like, the thing that I would go to and say pretty often is that, like, I feel like we're making the player fill bars just to fill more bars. That's kind of my, like, default go-to. If it feels like I'm just filling bars to fill more bars, which is super reductive in a way too, like, it's for dramatic effect a bit, but if that's the first thing I see and not the fun that I'm having, then I think we go in the wrong direction.
The result? A stagnant, disposable gaming ecosystem where quality is an afterthought and player goodwill is traded for short-term profit. That's why I find it almost comical to hear that EA's Andrew Wilson, a man who has spent years gutting single-player franchises, is suggesting that Dragon Age the Veilguard failed because it lacked live service elements. It's a perfect example of how disconnected these executives are from reality. They aren't just ignoring.
Yeah, the executives. My theory is that executives see all of gaming as the same. There's no compartmentalization of any of the types of audiences. Because I think if you're gonna aim and target a game for hardcore gamers versus like casual phone mobile gamers, I consider those completely separate audiences, and you got to target one or the other, and it's really hard to target both. So if you're making a lot of money on live service stuff, like EA probably is or was, you can come to the wrong conclusion that all games are the same. Therefore, if we're not making enough money in this side, it's because we didn't implement the mobile stuff that we make so much money on, right? But it's not. These are separate problems that they group together because they're under the same umbrella of games, which is unfortunate.
Ignoring the industry's trends, successes, and failures, they are actively rejecting the lessons that they should be learning. In an article written by Todd Black of GamerRanks titled EA Boss Feels Dragon Age the Veilguard Failed Because of a Lack of Live Service Elements, Todd writes, video games can fail for multiple reasons, and not all of them is on the developer or publisher. There are plenty of cult classic titles that were high quality games, it's just that many people didn't give them the chance. There are also times when games are high quality, but developers and publishers never gave them the big push marketing wise, so people really weren't aware of them and thus didn't buy them.
Yeah.
There are games like Dragon Age the Veilguard, which had plenty of push from BioWare and EA, but it also had a ton of baggage in the public eye.
The baggage is so real.
However, that's not what Electronic Arts feels. While speaking at an investor call, as noted by comicbook.com, EA CEO Andrew Wilson made a bold statement claiming that the reason the BioWare RPG failed wasn't because of a lack in quality or marketing, but because the game didn't have any live service elements to help it connect with gamers. Now, to make sure that I really drive home,
it's hard to parse all the info. I think
everybody understands this clearly.
I think that's the main problem that people have.
CEO voice. So give me just a second. We know as a global leader in entertainment, great titles, even when built and delivered with polished execution, can sometimes miss our financial expectations. In order to break beyond the core audience, games need to directly connect with the evolving demands of players who increasingly seek shared world features and deeper engagement alongside high-quality narratives in this beloved category. Dragon Age had a high-quality launch, the biggest launch, probably the biggest.
I feel like he's not
ever.
saying anything.
It was well reviewed by critics and those who played it. However, it did not resonate with a broad enough audience in this highly competitive market. Guys, I don't know what to say. Andrew
It's like
Wilson
a nothing
is
statement, you know?
I don't even think this guy is on Earth. I'm starting to wonder if all these gaming
Yeah.
all get together for a peyote retreat in the desert. Live service is becoming Scientology to these people. The idea that Dragon Age the Veilguard failed because of lack of shared world experiences that players crave is laughable when the data shows that players aren't craving shared world experiences, they're craving good games.
Yeah, true.
By the way, keep in mind,
massively
he's the one that made
true.
the decision to revert the game from a live service game back into a single player game. So if he had all this infinite wisdom, where was it when he made that decision? This isn't the first time that EA has tried to push this narrative. Back in 2017, Wilson said almost the exact same thing, that players just don't want linear games anymore like they did 10 years ago. And what was the result of that thinking? Well, EA shut down Visceral Games, the developer.
I worked on that. Just it wasn't going well, guys, but that's why.
Of Dead Space, one of the most beloved single-player studios that they had, because CFO Blake Jorgensen declared that they had to cut the bridge when you realize that you can't make a lot of money on something. And here we are years later watching EA continue the same move away from single-player games and pushing more into live service, blaming the
that project was complicated, and I clearly can't get into it.
Nothing more than a desperate attempt to justify a shift that's well underway, a shift where EA can quietly transition all of its studios into live service factories while cutting out single-player development entirely. Because to them, single player is too expensive, too risky, and not profitable enough. And to me, that's a death sentence. I think that by ignoring single player successes and their value, these studios and publishers have lost sight of why players come to play games in the first place. And that isn't sustainable, and we're starting to see the signs of that now. Now, before I get into this, because this is a multi-layered issue that these games and these companies are suffering from, I don't have an issue with live service games. I love live service games. There's plenty of them that I play, but I think that these companies have undervalued single-player games and complete paid experiences, and I don't think they understand those game successes, and I think they're failing to learn the right lessons. Players do not have the time, the money, or the energy to only play live service games.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. Oh my God. I don't want to play a lot. I want to play a single player game at my own pace. And the older I get, the more that's true. And if your whole pit, if the youngest kids aren't playing service games, or they're exclusively the only people playing service games, and your older audience doesn't have the time to commit to play with all these FOMO things, then who are you left with? I don't think it's anybody. And the more good single player games come out, the less that the older audience checks out, right? And you kind of get this weird, like, kids are starting to play less games. And then you got on the other end, the older people are only playing console games on PC. They want them to look pretty, or they're going to play a lot of indie games, something with complete experiences. Then, like, who's vacuuming all these Surface games up? Who?
Need variety. And in a lot of ways, I think something that they've kind of forgotten is that single player games kind of act as a loss leader, drawing people into a publisher's ecosystem, building rapport, creating credibility, and strengthening that studio's reputation. Because reputation is a currency. YouTubers know this all too well. Every single time I take a sponsorship, I'm spending some of my reputation. But
credit and debit.
Everything I do a sponsorship, because reputation and respect has to be earned before it can be spent. And I think there's something to say about creativity as a currency as well. It needs to be generated and nurtured before it can be spent, and there is a finite amount of it. When you only focus on live service games, you are locking your developers into creative purgatory. They don't get to explore, take risks, or try something new. They're stuck turning out the same shit, update after update, working on the same maps, the same mechanics, and the same game without ever learning anything new, never evolving. Hell, I recently spoke with current and former Call of Duty developers when I was getting ready to make this video, and I asked them about the issues that were plaguing their games, and they all pointed to the exact same thing. They are never allowed to do any real engineering or creative work on the IP or its engine.
Yeah, you don't want to rock the boat, right? Like, you don't want to rock the money machine. It's that keep the next thing coming. But at the same time, each next thing that comes, and the quicker it comes, the less people care over time. And there's a reluctancy to take the time to bake something better and put it out a little bit later in order to get a bigger return on it. You see this with, like, MMO expansions probably the most, right? Or big patches like Cyberpunk 2.0. You get a huge resurgence of people when you really take the time to cook something. And I think you get a much more, like, back end loaded return. So you release a patch. That's huge. That changes a bunch of stuff. You get a lot of people back in. But that means you have a barren land where you're not consistently printing something. And I think that's where companies get a little scared. Then you're just in a wasteland of, like, whatever. But if you don't do anything, that bar only goes down. If you don't change anything, if you don't make it exciting, if it's the same, with how competitive the market is, it's very easy as a user or as a consumer to just be like, all right, I'll look elsewhere. That's fine.
It has effectively been the same thing for over a decade because Activision refuses to give them the time to improve it. Why? Because they have to ship a new Call of Duty every single year. Activision, from my perspective, is the
3 teams rotating or something.
Single-player games and choking the life out of its own studios. They absorbed Neversoft and Radical Entertainment and then sent those developers into the Call of Duty mines. They killed creativity in exchange for predictable assembly line production, and now their games are suffering as a result of that. Why not let them go back and develop another Tony Hawk Pro Skater or a new prototype sequel? Let Raven Software go make another Singularity. Let's see how that experimentation and creativity could be used in Call of Duty or maybe an entirely new IP in the future. This is why live service.
Yeah, you need to find the next horse in a sense, right? You need to have one constant stream of money while trying to think of ways to be future proof, which is weirdly something that I think a lot of companies don't consider. And maybe they do, and it just turns up a lot of failures. But like something I've always thought about if I was running a company, I would try to guarantee that we have enough room for two failures at any time. Like I think of companies that do that really well, like maybe Supermassive Games. They made a lot of money on Hades, and as far as I know, they have a very small team. This team is sustainable for years and years and years without really much. Like they could fuck up two games, just completely wasted effort, sells nothing or whatever, and they'd be fine because they had Hades do so well. Like that's the kind of thing that I think is worth doing for a company because then you're allowed to be creative, you're much more stable, and nobody's worried about losing their jobs. So it kind of enables people to both be paid well and be creative, right? And like we just don't have that, so we're constantly losing expertise when people are scared of layoffs. It's what Nintendo talked about, I think. Like when people are afraid of losing their jobs, they're going to focus more on making the company as much money as possible, which is a necessity, of course. Instead of actually going out and finding new creative ideas that might touch the audience in a new special way, um, that might actually generate more money 5 years down the line because they got ahead of it. They got creative, they got innovative, and they made something fresh.
Games are failing today. These companies are completely out of touch. Their games are devoid of creativity. They're pumping out copy-paste corporate slop that's only temporarily relevant before
Yikes.
players inevitably just burn out from it. Live service isn't inherently bad, but the way that these executives have been handling it, well, it's a slow, creativity-draining death march.
Yeah, diminishing returns is huge. It's that every year, every Call of Duty, the player base will play it less because it wasn't long ago when they just played it previously, and their enjoyment of that is already such an enormous amount of hours. And with the way modern society is of how people context switch constantly, you're only getting someone for maybe 1 year. You get someone for 2 months. The next year it'll be 1 month. The next year it'll be 3 weeks. The next year it'll be 1 week, and then you lose that player.
Player games, standalone titles, or traditional games are what built this industry. Live service games are just a product of that. They are what taught developers how to connect with players. They gave studios the time to understand what players actually want, to build mechanics that resonate, and to develop the skills that were necessary for them to succeed later on and create new things like live service games. But these executives don't see it that way. They don't see developers as creators. They see them as factory workers assembling the same generic product over and over again until they're burned out. And that's the real problem here. How creative do you think a developer can be if they've only ever worked on Call of Duty? What happens when you go to ask them to make something else? They can't. Haven't you guys noticed that every single time we see a game that's made by former Destiny, Call of Duty, or Battlefield developers, it just ends up looking like the same game that they've always made?
Another shooter, right?
Doesn't make new games.
I like shooters though.
How to. And it's not just them. Franchise fatigue is killing single-player games too. Every Ubisoft open-world game feels like another Assassin's Creed reskin because
I also have a guilty pleasure for Ubisoft games.
Try something new. But instead of course correcting, EA, Activision, Ubisoft, and every other major publisher is chasing this model, and they're betting everything on short-term profit. And while it's worked before, and it might be working now in some cases, it's not going to work forever. Eventually, they are going to run out of players that are willing to put up with the same tired games and developers that are willing to make them. It really is a death march because they can't take their foot off the gas. They cannot stop. They have
the graph must go up. The graph needs to go up.
Service games, they have to command all of their attention because if they don't, the investors are going to leave, and we can't have that. And the CEO, he's not going to make that big old bonus that he wants. Lord knows they don't suffer from any consequences for their actions. And they don't think about the long-term consequences of those actions on the companies that they have right now. They just rot them out and jump ship the second they get the chance to.
Yikes.
And what ends up happening as a result is the longer that they pay attention to these games, the longer that these games command their full attention, Well,
Mhm.
the more damage it's doing to their audience because they're losing touch with that audience. They're not developing anything new. They're not giving their developers any creative freedom to grow and be better at
Yeah.
their job or to improve the engine or whatever it might be. And what do
Tech
you
debt
think
is
is going to
huge
be
in
the end
game
result of
development.
that? Well,
You'd be
the
surprised
foundation
at
of some of these
how many
long-standing
games are put
live
together with
service
duct
games
tape.
is completely rotted out. It's just waiting for somebody else, a slight wind to come by and just topple the whole thing over. You know, I was wondering something recently. Why live service games feel so homogenous. And I know a lot of you guys have already
Mhm.
experienced this. You look and you see a new live service game come out and you're like, that looks a lot like this other game, but just
Yeah.
reskinned or a different theme or whatever it might be. And the reason why is because they just keep cycling these developers around. Concord, brought to you by the developers of Destiny 2, making Destiny 2 combat but boring and with ugly characters. We're getting Temu versions of
Yo.
games rather than anything genuinely fresh or new.
Oh,
2K just
Timu is such a
fired the
fucking
director of
burn.
Project Ethos. Never heard of it? That's why they fired him. It's ex-Call of Duty veterans that are making a Fortnite copy, just a straight-up clone, but diverse. Sound familiar at all to you guys? I mean, Xbox just hired the marketing and operations director of Concord for Halo. Because that's going to work. The biggest issue that I see in these long-standing live service games is that they are losing control of their games, they're losing touch with their audience, and they are unable to do anything about it because they just
Yeah.
refuse to stop. Because all of these games, I'm telling you guys, go look, every single one of them is suffering from the same issues because it's the same people making the same game with the same updates, and they just cannot fix anything.
I don't know if it's the same people per se. It might be something I've always thought it was weird was like how many game design schools spun up. And that's just a theory on my part. Maybe it's not the same people. Maybe it's the same, like, teaching the same book over and over again, which doesn't really like make the it's like all the MBAs going to every company and doing all the same moves, right? It's that we got to maximize profits and squeeze as much of the juice as possible from this dry orange. Um, I always had a theory that that might be it. It's that people are going to school to learn all the same stuff, and they basically take every game and apply all across the board. Yeah.
They can never change it, can never evolve it. And they're just waiting for somebody else, some other competition to come by and just knock them out of their seat. And that's exactly what's going to end up happening. And the cycle is just going to continue over again. And in the case of like EA or Ubisoft or Activision, in their greed, they have stripped the forest bare. They have
Yeah.
drained the talent, so there's not even a drop left. And now it's all going up in flames. And something that I don't think they realized, I don't know how they didn't see this coming. The fire's burning a little bit faster than they probably imagined. And the
A little
reason
bit.
why, and it's something that I'm surprised a lot of other people haven't taken notice of, but did you guys
No, we know.
that in 2024 alone, PlayStation had 25 live service games hit their store? That's just on one platform. You add Steam into that pool? My God.
Oh, Steam's live service
all want the
platform
biggest
games would be
Too many
crazy.
fishermen, not enough fish. The pond isn't getting any bigger. It's drying up. See, the problem with chasing
The pond
trends
is
that
getting
eventually
smaller.
The market is going to reach a saturation point, and live service gaming has already hit its breaking point. The industry's gold rush towards live service games was fueled by the idea of seemingly endless profits from games like Fortnite, Warzone, and Genshin Impact. But as more games have flooded the ecosystem, the reality has become painfully obvious that players are spread too thin, and the industry has created an environment in which, well, nothing feels permanent. When PUBG first popularized the Battle Royale genre, its audience was locked in. There was nowhere else to go. But now that audience is disseminated across countless games: Fortnite, Warzone, Apex Legends, Hunt Showdown, Escape from Tarkov, and the list keeps growing. There's more and more.
It's true. That audience is the same.
Shooters. Once Overwatch ruled
You're just spreading the same audience out more.
Stolen its thunder. Valve's deadlock is quietly making improvements, and niche competitors are picking away at the audience that's left. And here's the core issue: the more
I'm surprised
options the
Deadlock
players
isn't
have,
doing
the harder
better.
it becomes for any single game to retain its audience. In the past, live service games had a natural monopoly. Players stayed where they had to. Now, the second a game stumbles, well, there's already another game that's ready to take its place.
Yeah, video games used to be third places for people, and I think we've leaned away from doing that recently.
Now, what makes matters even worse is that these companies haven't done anything to actually hold on to their audiences outside of trying to trap them in loops of sunk cost fallacy. They don't build communities, they build financial incentives to stay. flooding the games with battle passes, FOMO-driven events, and expensive cosmetics.
I
But
hate
there's a
FOMO
massive
so
flaw
much as
to
a
that
player.
system. Once players leave, they don't come back. And why would those players come back? Because it's not like any of these games are doing anything for them in the first place. They're not delivering on their needs. They're not fixing issues in their game. Heck, they're not even keeping up with industry best practices. Newer live service games like Marvel Rivals have non-expiring battle passes, allowing you to be able to
Great
progress
call,
it
by
at
the
your own
way.
pace. Games like
Great call for
Helldivers 2
them.
are pushing
It
regular,
makes me
meaningful
actually
content
want to
updates
jump on and play
without the
Marvel
need for
Rivals at
excessive
any time.
monetization. You can earn it all just by playing the game. Meanwhile, Fortnite, the king of live service games, is constantly reinventing itself, offering massive collaborations, completely fresh mechanics, and incentives that actually feel rewarding. What have
Yeah,
these long-standing
Fortnite's
live
really
service
interesting to
games
watch
done
as
to
a
keep
user,
up?
even when you're
Almost
not,
nothing.
even if you're
Call of
not a
Duty,
player.
Apex Legends, Destiny 2, they've spent years raising their prices, removing content, and doubling down on aggressive monetization while offering less in return. They aren't rewarding players' loyalty, they're punishing it. And I know this firsthand. When live
Yeah.
service games were fresh, I
It's like
spent
human
money.
nature. You can't take stuff away without giving something back. Like the moment you take anything away, I don't care what it is. There's just something that doesn't sit right with people when you take stuff away. Because you already spent the money, right? There's an expectation that it should stay. And when you remove it, I don't know. I don't even like it, even if it makes sense. There's something in my brain that's like, but I paid for that.
All the time, I'd buy skins, battle passes, cosmetics, all of it. But the more games that got released, I realized that none of it really mattered. The skins, the battle passes, the digital trinkets that I spent money on, all of this stuff was meaningless the moment that I stopped playing that game. And as I moved from game to game, I stopped spending almost entirely because I knew I would inevitably leave. Why
Oh,
invest
that
in
is a true.
something
That is such a good point. Why would I spend money if I'm only gonna play this game for a little bit and leave? That is something that I think about. That this is very true. That's a very good point.
temporary? Look at Call of Duty. They've tied Warzone to every new entry release in the series, meaning that every single year that there's a new Call of Duty that comes out, all the skins that you purchased, all the camos that you earned, all the progress that you've made, well, it's all wiped entirely clean. Every year, players are starting out in a brand new microtransaction ecosystem where their past investments, both time and money, have been made entirely meaningless because Activision doesn't value your money. What is going to be the long-term effect on those players? This is the environment that the industry has created. In their greedy attempt to chase infinite growth, they've now turned every single game into a temporary investment, eventually conditioning players to never fully commit because, well, they know something new is right around the corner. And while we might
Exactly.
not be seeing the full effects of
Exactly.
this yet, I think we're starting to see the signs of it. EA's been doing the same thing with their sports games, and it's no wonder that year over year, live service money and player retention is falling. Players spend time and money in their Ultimate Team modes only to have that completely erased with the next installment. That's why I think it's nearly impossible for some of these struggling live service games to recover because they've trained their audiences to leave the moment that things get stale. They've made core features feel like an afterthought while monetization takes a priority. They've made every single game feel like a disposable experience, so why should players
Yeah.
stay or spend money on them?
The
This kind of
juice
loops
has
back
been
to the original
squeezed
discussion I was having
completely.
before on the long-term consequences of live service games, how the longer they go on, the more the industry loses sight of what actually brings players in. Most of these companies didn't start out making live service games. They had to make games that delivered value up front. They forgot how to do that. They used to have to make an impact on day one, and they had to hold on to that player's attention immediately. They had to be worth the money because if they weren't, they failed. That sense of urgency and respect for the audience is gone when you turn a game into a routine. Now, beyond losing players in existing
Oh,
games,
the
the
worst feeling
oversaturation of live service games
when a
is
game
making
is a
it nearly
routine instead of
impossible to launch
playing
new
for
ones.
fun.
There are only so many players and only so many people have the time, money, and patience to dedicate to a single game, yet these companies keep flooding the market with the same type of game competing for the same limited audience. Think about
Yeah.
it. Sony planned over a dozen live service games to launch between 2024 and 2025.
That was
Where did
always a
they
bad
think those
idea.
players would come from? And better yet, how did they expect for any of these games to be profitable when you're making so many live service games that you're not only competing with the industry, you're now competing with yourself. You are cannibalizing your own games. What did they expect?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that like my gut says Sony expected to charge for most of those games up front too. So they're buy day one and service games. Um and in a world where there's so many free to play games that come out right away that then are supported by live service, a lot of gotcha games really. And I mean like Marvel Rivals, even Overwatch going free to play. Like you can't really get away with that unless the game is exceptional like Helldivers 2, which is a Sony game that succeeded. So sometimes it works.
How did they think flooding the market with dozens of competing live service games, many of them sharing the same monetization models, gameplay loops, and even development DNA, was going to work? Look, live service games need long-term investment from players. They need dedicated time, engagement,
They're
and
third
spending to
places
be
for
successful.
people.
Yet Sony and a lot of these other
People don't want to
publishers keep
change
trying to go with a
bars
shotgun
every year,
approach,
you
launching
know? People
multiple
want
at
to
once as if players are going to be
live
able
in
to
the
juggle
go
them
to the
all.
same
All of these
bar every
companies are
fucking day
cannibalizing
for
themselves,
for
splitting their own
decades.
potential
Why
audience
World of
across too
Warcraft
many
does so well.
projects, too many games, and too many financial asks. You can't build a thriving long-term player base when every 6 months you're throwing a new live service game into the ring and expecting it to gain traction. These companies have bet everything on endless live service growth, and instead, well, they've created an unsustainable arms race where games don't have a chance to even establish themselves in the market before somebody else is there trying to take their place.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I've already been proven right, because what was the end result of Sony's big push into live service? Well, over 10 of the known projects that Sony is making for live service have been canceled, including the absolute dumpster fire that was Concord, with thousands of jobs lost and hundreds of millions of dollars torched for nothing.
Canceled. Oh, they canceled Marathon? I didn't know that they do that. I know people working on that. Last of Us Online was weird, but that game might have done well. God of War game, I don't think would have done great. Ben Studio, who knows what they were working on. Twisted Metal, also 50-50. I think you just need a single player Twisted Metal. Like, shape Twisted Metal like Mario Kart and then make an online mode in it. It would probably do really well. Payback, yeah. Horizon MMO. I don't know why they milk Horizon so much, but I think the first one sold well enough that they keep dipping into that pond over and over again. Yeah.
The only survivors, Bungie's Concord and Fair Games, which is effectively Concord 2 Payday Boogaloo, and we know exactly how that's going to end. Personally, I can't wait to farm it. Thank you, Sony, for the content. The only game that they actually found success with, Helldivers 2.
There it is.
A game that was a breakout hit, yet Sony found a way to be able to sabotage themselves, wanting to force players into PlayStation login, but luckily they ended up walking that back and the game is recovered. But I'm going to take a wild guess and say that game is not the success
intro is
that they were
hilarious.
trying to bet on. But this was Sony's big bet. They thought live service was the future, and out of the 12 plus games that they were working on, or at least the ones that we know of, only one of them found moderate success. Now they're just stuck cleaning up the wreckage. The reality is that this industry is too competitive and too unpredictable to bet everything on live service. These companies think they're diversifying themselves.
It is unpredictable, which is the scary part for being an investor in it, I think.
The exact same game. Every game has a battle pass. Every game wants you to grind
I
for
don't like
unlocks.
battle passes.
Every game wants you to log in daily. And when everything is the same, nothing stands out. And the worst part of it is that these companies know that the gaming audience isn't infinite. They just don't want to admit it. That's why we're seeing PlayStation and Xbox slowly abandon console exclusivity, because they need every sale that they can get. Square Enix and other publishers are finally putting their biggest franchises on multiple platforms because exclusivity just isn't sustainable anymore. Xbox is putting Forza Horizon 5 and the Gears of War collection on PlayStation, and allegedly they're also going to end up bringing the Master Chief collection over. I'm all for ending console exclusivity, and honestly,
what about like macro transactions, you know? Like, if I don't want to pay MTX because I'm being nickeled and dimed, what about every 4 months I just drop a macro transaction that's just like, here's all the skins we made, here's all the emotes, whatever. You can buy the whole thing for $30 and you can use all of it right away. Just take it, enjoy, have fun. And every 4 months you do another dump of that. And it's like adding an expansion on a service game, but you just give people everything. You let them express themselves, you let them be, and you just do macro transactions. And they can opt in or opt out. You don't lock out player bases between who has what and what where. All the content is free, but if you want to look cool, it's an extra dump of a macro big pack that we just give it all to you. I would buy that, but I don't know if like you could convince a company to do that. But I'm getting excited at the idea that if I was ever going to do a service game, I like the idea of macro transaction. I don't want to look through a store page. I just want to be like, can I just buy it all? It's all digital garbage anyway. Can I just have the whole suite and just give it to me like a Sims expansion pack? That would be great.
Xbox is making a smart move in doing this, but let's not pretend that this is happening because of some consumer first mentality. This is happening because these companies are desperate. They've overexpanded, overestimated their own success, and now they're scrambling to fix the mess that they've created. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, but I don't think that video games and publicly traded companies are a sustainable combination. Games are nuanced, creative projects. They do not fit into the corporate mold of ever-increasing stable profits. Investors
Yeah,
and
they're not
executives thought that live
consumable.
service games
They're
were
not
the
like a
golden ticket.
one-time
They thought that
consumable.
this
They
was the
have to
first
be
way to
fun, and fun
industrialize an
is
industry that
subjective,
was
and
by
fun is
nature
trendy.
unpredictable. But the reality is, it's impossible. Every game is a risk, every design choice, every mechanic, every update, they all carry uncertainty. You need that in this industry. That's how games grow. That's how these successful live service games came into existence.
Yeah, that's the thing about games. There's what works for one game could not work in another game. And so you have to pick and choose what combo of mechanics and design that you want in a game that makes it sing together. So when you try to go for certainty, you're asking what mechanics do the most people enjoy in the combo that is most enjoyable, which makes a very homogenous set of games that we have right now, which is the problem that he's describing, right? If you only target certainty, you only do the things that the most people will like without considering what weird combo of things could fit together to create a Dark Souls, to create a Kingdom Come, to create a Baldur's Gate, where they don't have mass appeal, but they have appeal in the blender that they use to put everything together, or the puzzle that they jammed all the pieces in.
In the first place. You cannot manufacture guaranteed success in an industry built on creativity and innovation. They're trying to turn gaming into something predictable, and it's like forcing a cylinder through a square hole. It just doesn't work. These games need to evolve. They need to be different.
It all goes in the square hole right now. Everything, no matter the shape,
experiences.
square hole.
Instead of fostering creativity, these companies have suffocated it, dumping all of their resources into the same few live service titles year after year. Eventually, they're going to hit a wall. They're going to realize that there's no fuel left in the tank, and when that moment comes, they won't have any creative ability to make anything new to pull them out of that death spiral because they've spent all their time maintaining the old. But the bigger issue here is that the industry is expanding faster than the player base. The number of games keeps increasing. The number of customers isn't growing fast enough.
Yeah.
There's too much supply.
There's too much supply.
It's not just AAA publishers that are running the show anymore.
The double A's
Smaller
are doing that
studios,
too.
indie developers and solo creators are all claiming their share. Developer tools are getting easier to use. The barriers to entry are lower.
You only have so much hours in a day.
Just aren't competing.
And
with
tools
each other
are available,
anymore.
and
They're
there's
competing
AI
with the
to
entire
enable
gaming
people to do
landscape.
stuff.
And that's a fight that I don't think they're prepared to win, and I
They're
don't
not.
think it's a fight they can. There are so many factors working against these live service games that I'm surprised that we haven't seen more issues pop up sooner than this. We've seen some of them over time, gradually, slowly but surely, but I think
People
it's
are
starting
aware
to pile up, and it's going to turn into a massive fire here in just a minute, especially with some of these larger established franchises. Because keep in mind, what is Activision without Call of Duty? What is EA without their sports games or without Apex Legends? What is Ubisoft without was it Rainbow
Ubisoft.
Six Siege?
Sorry.
Like, these are the things that are holding these companies together, and without them, they are in a world of trouble. They are in a world of trouble. And how could you not see this coming? You could take any factor and point it directly at the live service industry, and it becomes a problem. Let's look at economics as an example. If I go to buy a video game, I don't really regret that purchase. I don't feel bad for making it if it's a game that I wanted, as long as it's good and it doesn't have any problems, which that usually never ends up being a problem because I wait. I don't pre-order games or anything like that. I wait to make sure it's actually good before I purchase it. Well, I never have a problem with that. If I go to buy a microtransaction, I always feel dirty. I feel weird.
It's true.
Shower afterwards because it's not necessary.
Yeah, it's imagine going to a restaurant. You have an okay meal, but you decided on that meal. It was okay. You ate it and you left. But if you went to a restaurant and they were like, the plate is free, the steak is 10, the shrimp is 5, the veggies are 3, then you're nickeled and diming yourself in a way that, like, well, if the shrimp was bad, I just wasted $3. Where it's almost like if the whole was just okay, then it was just okay. And it's maybe it's a psychological thing, but it is true that, like, the sunk cost fallacy and the buyer's remorse and regret happens much quicker for MTX than it does for a full game, because at least you bought the full meal compared to feeling like you didn't get a whole meal and you still wasted money, and you could have just spent slightly more money for a complete meal that might have been better than just the nickel and diming of the little pieces. Strange.
And if it is necessary, if it's part of power progression or whatever it is, a gacha game or something like that, then it feels even worse because I don't want to be buying those kind of things. Those are the exact opposite of the microtransactions I want to see.
And we're not the audience for that, right? The people who make this content
type of economic strife
and watch this content are not those people.
Raising prices, inflation, and people having a hard time finding jobs or whatever. Now they're going to make it even more difficult for them to be able to justify those purchases in those games, regardless of whatever their price is, because they know it's temporary. That brings on another problem because of the fact that these experiences are so temporary in the first place. The market is flooded with these games. There's so many different live service games to play. Look how many gotchas you can play, how many first-person shooters or battle royales
everywhere.
or whatever. I don't
you have so much choice.
Spending money on this stuff because chances are I'm not really going to give a shit about it in about.
It's like having a lot of cooked food at home and going out to buy something that is just going to be okay.
Sports games that literally just erase all of the money that you spend regardless. So
yeah,
what's the point of even spending money over there? Yeah, it's inevitable at this point that these games are going to run into some serious issues. And again, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened sooner. I think the real reason why we've seen such a big push into live service because I'm sitting here, I'm like, there's no way that they couldn't see the long-term effects of live service games. And then I realize they do. They know it.
Well, yeah.
All these decisions are being pushed by CEOs that rarely ever face consequences for their actions, that are there to drive up revenue as much as they possibly can, drain the well, make money for the investors, and then jump ship as fast as they can. So then they can leave.
Not entirely. I don't know if that's their intention. It might just be what happens accidentally. I think the longer I've been in the industry, the longer I've realized that like a lot of people don't have the capacity to think long term, or they can't afford to think long term because thinking long term would mean less money for the next quarter or next round. And then you get stuck in this loop that you really can't get out of. And it's kind of like a weird trap that the whole industry is stuck in, that there's more money that needs to make more money that isn't making money, but they need the money to make the next more money because graph always needs to go up. And then you just kind of get, there's no escape from this, right? Even if they know it, it's hard to redirect an entire company without doing things that you might not like, right? And being the person to make that call is something that I guess I would imagine it's kind of scary for an executive, even though that's what they should do.
Guy to find out that the whole thing's about to collapse, and then they get to be the guy that can try to save the company if they can. Or you can be like Bobby Kotick and you can just sell the company to Microsoft and look like a hero. Good job, Bobby.
Way to go, Bobby.
There's so much more here that I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of this. I'm going to do the deep dive video on Call of Duty that's going to be coming up pretty soon. I might end up doing that next week maybe, but that's going to uncover more of these issues, I think. That's a really interesting case with that game. But man, I really do feel like it is just the disposable nature of these games. That's probably the biggest thing that's becoming probably the biggest issue for most of them is that there's just
the fast food.
Of these games
like I mentioned another game.
Each other too quickly.
Yeah.
And everybody is constantly looking for the next game to jump ship to. And over time, not only are you going to have all these disposable games, but you're also going to have the audience that is spread out so much that most of these games likely aren't even going to be sustainable. In the
There's not enough butter for the bread.
Not gonna be able to make enough money to hold on to enough developers to even make content to keep players playing those games in the first place. I think that's a big problem that they're going to run into. Too many games. Like I said before, you got too many fishermen, not enough fish. And that's going to become a really, really big problem. And at the exact same time, the other thing is that I just think that live service games kind of, fly a flag in the face of like how these studios got started in the first place. Because the only reason that they got to make these live service games is because, well, they made single player or multiplayer experiences that weren't live service games before.
Yeah.
And that's how they learned to get the ability to even pull players into their games, to make fans, to create this ecosystem that they have. And the further they get away from that, and the more they only pay attention to this byproduct of the industry, the more they're going to lose sight of what actually got them there in the first place. And
true.
When I look at the quality of the games and the quality of the content that's delivered to players, I'm seeing a direct correlation. I don't know about you. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, share it with your friends, like the video, subscribe to the channel.
That was a good video.
Comment down below. Follow me on Twitter.
That was a lot more reasonable than I thought it would be.
And yeah. Thank you guys for watching. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot more reasonable than I thought it would be. I think I agree with it on almost all of it. There's definitely a drain on the industry of just like live service games and them being too much. And I think there's now a building awareness to it from even the people who make those decisions, because these games are being canceled across the board. And each one that fails is a tell to all the other executives that, hey, maybe we're in a time where this doesn't work anymore and we can't just double down. And even if they are doubling down, I think it's just lip service. I think the reality is that a lot of them don't know what to actually say, don't know what the real solution is, and they're kind of waiting for the solution to be easily grabbable by someone else. And I think what that looks like is a lot of double A developers innovating in small live service games that they know will be consumed for 6 months and then dumped away, or they're evergreen in their own way. So, like a Terraria that you can pick up at any time with friends, taking that idea, building on that, and building games that can kind of be self sustaining and multiplayer and serviced within a small box, kind of like Minecraft, where you can run everything on your own without the company's involvement, so that if the company were to ever move on from that game, that can still be an evergreen product that exists on its own. Um, Maybe with some little updates depending on what Windows or Steam OS thing is happening. But like that is ideally what I would do. I would make a service game that doesn't have to rely on so much like server client integrity, that can be kind of formed in a small way, almost like a D&D campaign, right? You grab 8 friends, you set a time and you do that yourself, and the game is just a vessel for you and your friends to enjoy. I see that being a thing. Um I'm I don't really see like really big games making it anymore, because the audience is so different. And if the audience is there and coexisting in other games, it just feels like people are very committed to those things already. And the only thing that it will ever replace those current games is if a better version of those games comes out. So you see that with like Marvel Rivals. Marvel Rivals replaced Overwatch in a sense, right? At least the player base that would play that probably just shifted over to that, because they were getting something that was stale and now it's something that's new, and then it's kind of the same thing and they move over. But trying to make a new MOBA, I think nowadays is insane. You're not going to beat Dota, you're not going to beat League, and they have to be better than those two, which is probably why Deadlock is kind of not doing well. Even though they're trying to innovate, they're trying to grab the combination of shooter and MOBA together in a way that is long term and sustainable, because MOBAs have really long legs. MOBAs have a high skill ceiling. But even then, people are choosing to play Dota and League instead, and those will stand the test of time and are kings and have been kings since over a decade. So it'll be weird to watch how this proceeds, but overall, I really like this video. Check out his other stuff if you want. And if you enjoyed this, you know what to do. Otherwise, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much. Peace.